Israel is facing renewed political strain as the opposition leader urges the president to reject Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's request for a pardon. The appeal lands while Netanyahu remains on trial for corruption. As pressure builds across the political spectrum, the stakes around this decision are becoming more pronounced. Netanyahu's pardon plea. Tonight we ask, what's at stake? Good evening. Israel's political divide is deepening tonight. Yair Lapid is calling on President Herzog to dismiss Prime Minister Netanyahu's bid for a pardon, a request made with the corruption case still active in the courts. Well, it's triggered a sharp debate over accountability, legal process, and institutional credibility. We'll break down the implications and what this confrontation means for Israel's immediate political direction. But first, let's take a look at this report.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has submitted a request to the country's president, Isaac Herzog, seeking a pardon in his years-long corruption trial. The Prime Minister has been on trial for 5 years across 3 separate corruption cases, including charges of bribery, fraud and breach of trust. Netanyahu denies all charges and argues that the criminal proceedings are hindering his ability to govern, saying a pardon would serve the interests of Israeli society.
The state of Israel faces great challenges alongside great opportunities. In order to push away the threats and realise the opportunities, a national unity is required. The continuation of the trial is tearing us apart from the inside, is stirring heated controversies, intensifies rifts. I am sure, like many others among the people, that the immediate end of the trial will help a lot in lowering the flames and in promoting a wide reconciliation that our country needs so much.
Netanyahu's request has not gone unchallenged. While the Office of Israel's President says it will process the request according to standard practice, opposition leader Yair Lapid has urged Herzog not to grant a pardon.
From here I call on President Herzog. You cannot pardon him without an admission of guilt, an expression of remorse and an immediate retirement from the political life.
Meanwhile, protesters rallied outside Herzog's private residence on Sunday night against Netanyahu's petition. Demonstrators say the Prime Minister is attempting to avoid taking responsibility for his actions.
We're here to demonstrate and tell Buzzi Herzog, the President, that we are aware that he is a weak point in our battle for democracy in Israel. What Netanyahu is asking is not for a pardon. He is asking that his trial will be completely cancelled without taking any responsibility, without paying the price for how he tore up this country and how he eventually brought to the massacre of 7 in October.
There is no precedent for a presidential pardon for a sitting Prime Minister. Analysts say doing so in an election year could set a problematic chain of events in motion, blurring the line between the presidency and politics. The next election is due by next October, and many polls indicate that his coalition, the most right-wing in Israel's history, would struggle to win enough seats to form a government.
Okay, joining me now to discuss this further is A-News's Ollie Barrett, who for once is with us in the studio, not in London. It's great to have you here, Ollie. Let's get into this then. So this appeal to the president, what exactly did Yair Lapid say and how was it delivered?
It was delivered on social media in a video, but it was a direct message to the president in which Yair Lapid was insisting that this should not be something that the president should be granting this pardon for Mr. Netanyahu. And he is making the case that he believes that Netanyahu's individual interests are being conflated really with the interests of the state, and he has been making the point, as have other critics, that this would be unprecedented and that this would be something that he believes should only happen the pardon if there were to be an apology from Benjamin Netanyahu, an admission of guilt from Benjamin Netanyahu, and immediately stepping down from political life. And that is not something that the Prime Minister seems in any sense to be thinking about or considering or contemplating at this point.
Well, it really is a very serious situation for the Prime Minister then. Let's get into the specific nature of the charges. Exactly what is it that he is accused of?
So there are three strands really to the allegations around him. One is a case where he is alleged to have basically given political favours in exchange for gifts like cigars and champagne, denies those allegations. There is a separate strand to it in which it was related to accusations that he was offering to improve the circulation of an Israeli newspaper in exchange for favourable coverage from it. And then there's a third case also allegedly relating to positive coverage from a news organisation which was tied to regulatory decisions being made which related in turn to a telecoms company. As I say, he denies all of the allegations, insists it's all a witch hunt. He says that the cases are collapsing anyway, but wants this pardon, he says, because it's getting in the way of running the country effectively. And in terms of the cases, as you say, they are ongoing to the extent that Benjamin Netanyahu was in court today for one of them, for one part of it, and he is making the argument that it's getting in the way of governing because he says he sometimes has to go to court or be involved in these processes as much as 3 times a week, and he says that's simply not sustainable.
So obviously Mr. Netanyahu doesn't want this. President Trump has called, he made that famous comment about, oh, this is just all about champagne and cigars, it's not that important. But what is the official process for a presidential pardon in Israel?
Well, the presidency is making it clear that it's going to follow all of the due process, and it says what is happening now is that the pardon itself will go to the pardons department at the Ministry of Justice, but they are also saying that the president's legal advisors will also give a legal opinion on all of this. So 2 prongs, if you like, to how that unfolds. And as you were saying, it would be unprecedented for a pardon to be granted for a prime minister in this way. It would be almost unprecedented for a pardon to be granted with the cases still ongoing. In Israeli law, normally that would happen once they had concluded and a conviction had been reached.
And you'd mentioned there the Prime Minister has said, look, this is now getting in the way of the business of government. Beyond that, has he offered any more detailed defence that we're aware of? And if that is the mainstay of his defence, is that really enough to give the other side a reason to actually move forward with a pardon?
Well, we know that the submission that his team put forward to the President's office was 111 pages long, so there is a lot in there. He believes that there's a sort of deconstruction really of all of these cases against him, and that case is being made in this submission to the presidency. I think the response from the presidency in terms of getting some of this out in the public domain and making a statement to say that this is going to go through the correct channels and the process is going to be followed really reflects the fact that President Herzog is very deeply aware that critics of the government think that this is all too closely intertwined between the presidency and the Prime Minister's office, and they see him as potentially being politically damaged by all of this, but also too closely tied to the Prime Minister. So he's trying, I think, to put some of that distance there as all of this takes place, because critics certainly say that they, and we saw it in that tape there, that they see the President as a sort of weak link in the democracy. And so this does take us to questions about Israel's democracy much more broadly as well.
And what have we heard in terms of final decision from the President? And if we haven't heard anything yet, when are we expecting something?
They are not at this stage giving us much of a sense of when a final decision would take. What they're really pointing us towards is that the process will be proper and will be full, but not at the moment guiding us towards a timeline really. But bear in mind that an election is going to take place at some point in the next year, so there is an urgency really to it in that regard. And now all of the polling would suggest to you that the Prime Minister is not in a great spot when it comes to that election, but clearly that does just inject some urgency into the timeline.
Yeah, and just finally, Ollie, where is Mr. Netanyahu when it comes to popularity with the public? Because it's an interesting time, isn't it? You know, if indeed this war is actually coming to an end, often there is a sense in countries, isn't there, that the right person to lead us in war isn't necessarily the right person to lead us in peacetime or the period of reconstruction, reconfiguration ahead. Is there any sense of that behind the scenes, do you think?
I think there is a sense of that behind the scenes, but there are also questions among many Israeli voters about his leadership in the war as well, we should say. Many question the authorities' lapses ahead of October the 7th. Many question the way he has carried out the military operation inside Gaza. Now he has his supporters as well, but all of the polling suggests to us that the next election for him and his coalition looks very difficult indeed.
Ollie, we know you're going to stick around. For that we're grateful, but in the meantime, thank you very much for your analysis. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, after the break, the OSCE completes the formal closure of the Minsk process following a joint request from Armenia and Azerbaijan. Do stay with us. Welcome back, you're watching Prime Time. Now, before we get to the OSCE story, let's just recap on the visit of Pope Leo to Lebanon. Well, Pope Leo the 14th arrived in Beirut on Sunday as part of his first international trip as pontiff. He urged calm and dialogue at a time when Lebanon is under growing pressure from escalating regional violence.
Pope Leo XIV urged political leaders in Lebanon to make peace their highest priority in a country that remains a target of Israeli airstrikes. The pontiff made the comment on his second leg of his first overseas trip as Catholic leader. He met with Lebanese officials on Sunday, including the Parliament Speaker, Prime Minister and President. Addressing a chamber packed with politicians and religious leaders, Pope Leo praised the resilience of the Lebanese people.
Everywhere in the world around us, certainly there are millions of Lebanese here and throughout the world who serve peace silently day after day. Yet you who have important institutional tasks within this nation are destined for a special beatitude if you can say that you have put the goal of peace above all else. You are a people who do not give up, but in the face of trials, you always know how to rise again with courage.
His visit comes a week after Israeli airstrikes hit the Lebanese capital. Standing beside the Pope, Lebanon President Joseph Aoun delivered a defiant message. His remarks underscored the sense of siege many Lebanese feel amid ongoing instability.
Your Holiness, tell the world on our behalf that we will not die, we will not depart, we will not despair, and we will not surrender. We will remain here, breathing freedom, creating joy, mastering love, embracing innovation, chanting for modernity, and forging each day a fuller life.
Meanwhile, Lebanese citizens and visitors lined the streets to catch a glimpse of Pope Leo as his motorcade passed through Beirut. Lebanon is home to the largest Christian community in the Middle East and has been deeply shaken by the recent escalation between Israel and Hezbollah, fueling fears of a wider confrontation.
Okay, let's go to London now. And the UK's Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rachel Reeves, is pushing back against claims she misled the public over fiscal forecasts ahead of this month's budget. Well, speaking to the BBC on Sunday, she said she had been clear from the outset about the need to reinforce the nation's financial buffer. Let's just listen to that interview now.
Chancellor, welcome to the studio. Do you want people to trust you?
Yes, and I said during the election campaign that I want people to be able to trust me with the public finances. I will never play fast and loose with the public finances because when you do, it's ordinary family finances and business finances that pay the price. And that's why in the budget this week, I was really clear going into it and coming out of it that I wanted to build up that fiscal economic resilience. So the headroom that I had in the spring statement of £9.9 billion, I've taken that up to £21.7 billion. And I know that some people are suggesting that there was a small surplus that the OBR published on Friday. But if I was on this programme today, Laura, and I was saying £4 billion surplus is fine, there was no economic repair job to be done, I think you would rightly be saying that's not good enough. That would have been the lowest surplus that any Chancellor ever delivered against their fiscal rules. But I was clear that I wanted to build up that resilience. I could have cut public services. I chose not to. Instead, I've asked people to pay a bit more in tax to fund those public services. That is my choice, and I'm happy to defend those choices. I think they were the right things to do.
Well, Sir Keir Starmer has also weighed in on the debate surrounding the Chancellor's handling of the budget build-up. Speaking earlier, he rejected claims that Rachel Reeves misled the public over the fiscal forecasts. He says the government's position has been clear and stands by the Chancellor's approach.
We have a plan for a Britain that is built for all, and we're going to unlock the potential of every single person and community in this country. Because whether it's our public services that don't work, the cost of living crisis holding it back, or whole regions of our country ignored as sources of growth, in the end, it's all about potential. And that's why the budget was a moment of personal pride for me. I do not want to see a country where children grow up in poverty. I don't think anybody in this country wants that. There was no misleading. And I simply don't accept, and I was receiving the numbers, that being told that the OBR productivity review means you've got £16 billion less than you would otherwise have had, shows that you've got an easy starting point. Yes, of course, all the other figures have to be taken into account, but we started the process with significantly less than we would otherwise have had. There was a point at which we thought, myself included, that we might have to reach for a manifesto breach of some significance. I didn't want to get to that place, but I recognise we might have to. As the process then continued, it became clear to me and others that we might be able to do what we needed to do with our priorities without that manifesto breach. And that's what we did with the fair and necessary decisions that we took. We're confident we can beat the forecasts. We've already beaten them this year. We are in control of our future. We've already struck trade deals. They're attracting billions of pounds of investment. We're removing barriers to business right across the economy. The most important things that we can do for growth, the most important things that we can do for business is first to drive inflation down so that interest rates come down further still and the cost of business investment comes down with it. And second, to retain market confidence that allows for real economic stability so that businesses can plan with certainty. We can all see the challenge. Low productivity, the result of an economy scarred by austerity, by Brexit, and by consistently failing to unlock the nation's potential. So we need a productivity revolution. So we must all now confront the reality that the Brexit deal we have significantly hurt our economy. And so for economic renewal, we have to keep reducing frictions. We have to keep moving towards a closer relationship with the EU. Well, I'm not angry at the productivity review. It's a good thing that reviews like that are done from time to time. I'm bemused. Myself, I feel that doing it at the end of the last government and before we started might have been a good point to do a productivity review so we could know exactly what we were confronted with. Doing it 15, 16 months into a government, it had to be done sometime, but picking up the tab for the last government's failure and it's been the nature of the beast, frankly, for the last 16 months, but it was given a special emphasis in that exercise. So I'm not angry, I'm just bemused as to why it wasn't done at the end of the government rather than done now. Look, I'm not going to suggest that what happened last week, which was the entire budget being published before the Chancellor got to her feet, was not anything other than a serious error. This was market-sensitive information. It was a massive discourtesy to Parliament. It's a serious error, and there's an investigation that's going on. But as for the OBR itself, I'm very supportive of the OBR for the reasons I've set out. Vital for stability, vital and integral to our fiscal rules, which I've said a number of times are ironclad.
OK, let's invite back A News' Ollie Barrett, who's now joined us, fresh from the A News canteen. Ollie, very good to see you. A lot to unpack here. Let's just start with the Chancellor's main message. How did she defend her approach to public finances?
What Rachel Reeves is claiming is that the Office for Budget Responsibility put a productivity downgrade into their calculations that left her with this £16 billion worth of a black hole, is how it's often described, and that therefore she had to find the money to fill that black hole, and she did so in tax rises because, as we heard her say there, she didn't want to cut public spending left, right and centre. Now, the reason, despite making those claims, that she's being accused of misleading the British public is because it's emerged that actually when the OBR gave her that productivity review, at the same time they said, and also inflation, wage increases, tax receipts are in a better place than we thought. So actually some of that so-called black hole has been made up for elsewhere. But Rachel Reeves didn't make that clear at all in the build-up to the speech, or indeed in the speech itself, and that's why she's being pushed so strongly on all of this now, because the argument from her critics is that actually she made a lot of political decisions that she didn't necessarily have to make to try and, so the story goes, assuage concerns that many of her own Labour MPs have about the direction of travel of the government. So the accusation is she misled the British people because of a political expediency. And by the way, not just the British people. British journalists are being told there are members of the cabinet who feel misled by Rachel Reeves as well.
Wow, unsurprising really. And when you look at the rhetoric from the Prime Minister and you look at the Chancellor's recent interviews, and we saw in the package the interview with the BBC, it does appear that they at least believe that they've got away with it. There's a real confidence about the delivery, which feels surprising.
Well, there have been questions about this government's communications and messaging throughout their period in office, and those questions remain today, specifically about exactly what you're talking about and why there is this level of confidence, given there are such huge concerns about the budget. I will say one thing, which is that Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer did not expect or want on day 5 after the budget was delivered to still be facing questions about effectively whether they have lied to the British people. That's not where they wanted to be, but they are trying to mount a robust defence of the decisions that they took. And this was a key moment for them both politically. There have been all sorts of speculation recently about leadership challenges and whether one or both Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves may or may not be in their jobs within a matter of months. And I think Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer do have a level of confidence that the budget has at least brought them time with their own MPs. So perhaps some of the confidence flows from that.
And Ollie, I'll ask you a question. We've discussed this off air as well. No, which is the worst or the most damaging alleged lie? Is it the breaking the manifesto pledge, and that's still being debated now, Or is it this fact that the so-called black hole is either non-existent or certainly not as big a black hole as we were perhaps led to believe?
My view is the latter. I mean, I think governments break manifesto pledges often, more often than they would like to admit. Now, this government is still trying to claim it doesn't think it has breached the manifesto, and that's really getting into the realm of semantics. But I do think voters can forgive manifesto breaches, probably more so than they will forgive the idea that they are being lied to. And that's one of the reasons that this is such a difficult spot for these two individuals and this government to be in, because if the British public feels that they've been misled, and if the British public feels they've been misled purely to appease your backbench MPs in a very political way, that is not something that's going to go down well with the voters.
Where is the British public, do you think, at the moment when it comes to taxation? I mean, sometimes, you know, we're here in Baku, I travel around to various countries with work and speak to people. Many people are surprised at the level of taxation that you have to pay in the UK. But there are those at the moment in the UK that are calling for even more taxation. Where is the centre ground in the UK at the moment on tax?
Well, the polling that came out off the back of the budget suggests that a lot of British people feel that this was an unfair budget, that they feel more and more squeezed than ever. They feel that their taxes are going up, but public services aren't necessarily improving, or worse than that, they're actually getting worse as time goes on. We've also seen some migration numbers recently for the last year, which show that the number of Britons leaving the country is accelerating. And there is a lot of, that's data, but then you also have a lot of anecdotal discussion around people saying, sack this, I'm off to Dubai, or wherever it may be.
And that itself becomes polarised, doesn't it? So those on the right will perhaps be inclined to exaggerate or at least amplify those anecdotal stories. Those on the left will say, well, good riddance, off to Dubai with you. Where does the average family sit on this debate, do you think?
I think the average family feels squeezed. Again, the data and the polling shows us that. They do feel squeezed at the moment. They feel that housing costs in the UK are just extraordinary compared to other countries. Inflation in the UK has been higher than comparative economies in Western Europe. The British family feels that life is tough and has been tough for some time. And that takes us back politically to the chances, the prospects for this Labour government. I do think they can recover from here if by the next election the economy is flying again and people feel better off and people feel like the prospects are there for a brighter future. The difficulty for the government is that at every turn so far since they got into power, economic growth has really been anemic at best. And if that doesn't turn around soon, you start to wonder whether they have any prospect of returning to government after the next general election.
Well, in that case, then, the strategy, Ollie, does seem at least to make sense, even if you don't agree with the morality of it, if you like, in that the Prime Minister perhaps thought, well, the election is such a long way off that my immediate priority is to survive now to give myself a fighting chance.
Yeah, and at the last budget we saw tax rises too. The strategy then was to do it all in one go, get the bad stuff out of the way, and then hopefully see the economy move on. Now, a year later, she's had to do it again, despite saying she wouldn't, Rachel Reeves. But again, I think the calculation has been made on exactly the timeline you suggest. But the difficult arguments will persist for this government in the months ahead. And as I say, if economic growth doesn't return, they've got a real problem. The other reason she chose to do it now is that government borrowing costs have been spiralling almost out of control. And it gets to the point where the government's just spending a huge chunk of its daily income on servicing its debt. She feels that so-called headroom of a number more £billion will actually make the markets reassured. She hopes that feeds into lower borrowing costs for the UK, and that therefore actually that will be helpful over the next 2, 3, 4 years as well. So that's part of her calculation here
because
too.
Actually the borrowing's not necessarily going down, is it, dramatically?
No, exactly. And all of the planning that she puts in place is about a 5-year strategy. All of the forecasting from the OBR is related to this idea that in 5 years' time, your borrowing is starting to come down. It doesn't mean that this year or next year borrowing is going to come down. It's all quite far off into the distance. But those targets are even harder to hit if in the short term your borrowing costs are spiking. So all of this is wrapped up together.
Now, Ollie, one of the ways in which the Chancellor characterised this budget was to say to ordinary families, to businesses, look, I know this is slightly painful for you, but if I didn't take this tough action, it would have been worse in the near future. How credible do you think that characterisation is?
Certainly the row about the OBR and the numbers they gave Rachel Reeves before the budget make that a difficult argument for her to make. I think the other thing to say about that is she did in her speech, and has done since, said effectively, I know I'm asking for a lot from everyone, but we've all got to make a contribution. You know, it's almost sort of wartime language.
Yeah.
We all need to pull together and pull in the same direction. Again, going back to what we were talking about at the start, that's a really difficult argument to make if people think that actually a lot of the budget was about satisfying Labour MPs rather than necessarily doing the right thing for the economy or for the country, for households, individuals and businesses. So again, it makes all of those arguments more difficult to make given what we know about the OBR's role leading into the speech that she gave in the middle of last week. But bear in mind that earlier this month she gave a speech as well in which she effectively warned the country how difficult everything was going to be and how difficult the decisions were going to be. People are also looking back at that speech now and in the knowledge that the OBR had told her it wasn't quite as bad for the Chancellor as perhaps she was making out. So there's a lot of questioning going to be levelled at the government on an ongoing basis, I think, about the messaging leading up to the budget, and even going much further back than that. The Conservatives, the opposition parties in the UK, will claim that basically since the last budget, they've been warning about how difficult the next one was going to be, and the Conservatives will say even before that, after getting into power 18 months or so ago, they say that the government has effectively been talking down the economy and have created this so-called doom loop that means they keep having to come back with budgets like this one when they promised they wouldn't have to. So all of that has to be fed into, I think, the conversations about where the government is, the messaging to the public, and exactly what the coming months and years are going to look like.
And Ollie, what about the opposition parties? You know, as you say, we saw a very strong performance from Kemi Badenoch, the leader of the Conservative Party, in direct response to the budget. If you look at the Conservative Party, if you look at the other big parties, Reform, the Green Party, who are doing quite well at the moment, have they been able to make political capital out of the difficulty this government's got itself into?
Very much so. The polling tells you that, particularly with regards to Reform, who have been really doing well in the polls. Nigel Farage's party, they only have a handful of MPs in the House of Commons, but the polling suggests that if they were to head into a general election on these kinds of numbers, they'd be in with a good shout of winning, potentially. Now, polling now doesn't reflect how people actually vote, all the usual caveats apply, but certainly Reform have made gains in the minds of voters off the back of the difficulties that this government has experienced. The Conservatives, less so up to this point, they've been trailing Reform as well, but it is absolutely the view of many Conservative MPs that Kemi Badenoch had a very good response to the budget in that speech, and that she has been improving recently in her Commons performances in the House of Commons and with her general leadership. So I think some Conservative MPs hope that their corner might be beginning to turn. The Greens, as you say, have been polling very well, seeming to be taking voters from the left away from Labour as well. The Liberal Democrats certainly feel that they've been making political capital out of all of this. And so, yes, they smell an opportunity, all of those parties.
Very tough at the moment to be a centrist in UK politics, isn't it? Ollie, great to talk to you. It's been a pleasure having you here with us in the studio. Thanks very much. Okay, after the break, the OSCE confirms the Minsk process has formally concluded at the request of Baku and Yerevan, with its mandate ending at 11:59 p.m. on the 30th of November. Do stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching PrimeTime. The Organisation for Security and Cooperation in Europe has confirmed the formal closure of the Minsk process, with the mandate ending at 11:59 p.m. on the 30th of November after a joint request from Armenia and Azerbaijan. Well, the body says all administrative steps are now complete, reflecting the consensus reached on the 1st of September by all 57 participating states. Well, the Minsk group itself was created in 1992 to provide an international framework for talks on Karabakh, with the aim of preparing a peace conference in Minsk and keeping both sides engaged in diplomacy through the US, Russia and France as co-chairs. It became the main venue for political dialogue for more than 3 decades before both countries agreed it had run its course. Well, the decision to close it follows the Washington Joint Declaration of the 8th of August, signed by Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan and President Ilham Aliyev, a document witnessed by US President Donald Trump and viewed as the basis for bringing the process to an end. Well, joining me now to discuss this further is Sheraz Mahmood Khan, a research scholar at Western Caspian University in Baku. Mr. Khan, thank you very much indeed. Pleasure to have you on PrimeTime. How significant is this then? Because, you know, formally ending the process after more than 3 decades, just give us a sense of the significance of this joint request.
All right, thank you so very much for inviting me. First of all, second of all, that after 30 years, this organization of security and cooperation got ended. It is very significant in a way that we are seeing that the 2 countries which were involved in that was Azerbaijan and Armenia. And they have started talking to each other directly now, or they prefer to negotiate with each other on security directly than instead of relying on this organization. As we know that this organization has been there for 30 years, 1992 and all that, and for 30 years, the conflict never got ended. The name of the organization was Security and Cooperation. It was less of a security given by this organization for 30 years and less of a cooperation at the same time. At that time, it was chaired by Russia, the US, and France. But none of these actors did anything good to the security of the region, and the conflict went on against the international law, against the human rights, and the human rights were being violated, and the aggressor was not being stopped. So this organization was actually, ruining its legitimacy.
Mr. Khan, Mr. Khan, sorry to interrupt, yeah. But it's very interesting this, because we see, don't we, 2 different approaches. We've seen very recently an effective contribution by another nation state, namely the US, who's come in and been very helpful, versus this period in the sort of post-1992 period where you have this sort of multilateral organization type approach. And it seems to be what you're saying is the consensus is that that approach didn't work, but actually helpful contributions from sovereign nation states actually has been more effective.
Yeah, okay. So, you know, my point of view is that it did not work for, maybe it has worked for one of the countries and not worked for another country. One of the countries is Armenia. Armenia has been, you know, doing this war with Azerbaijan for all these decades, and no one has stopped it. France was, actually, France, one of the chairs, was in favor of Armenia to continue it, and the other actors, Russia has its own interest in the region, and Russia wants to be the security provider for all these countries and to this as well. And U.S. obviously was there to contain Russia in a broader perspective. So after this Ukraine war, things got a little changed because the relationship between Russia and the West got strained as well at the same time. And so France was one of the Western countries. So things got changed after that, and things went on. But what I'm trying to say is that this conflict was, the conflict between Azerbaijan and Armenia, nothing happened to it unless and until Azerbaijan did it itself, and and fought a war of 44 days and got its territories back. And now Azerbaijan is in a position to talk to Armenia. Otherwise, Armenia was not coming on the table of a dialogue, so this got ended. And then obviously it was when Armenian Prime Minister and Azerbaijan's president, His Excellency Ilham Aliyev, met in presence of the President of United States of America, back in August. And so that got formalized, and that was formally dissolved, this organization. So now things are really changing in the, as I say, it's a multi-vector world. The world of monopolarity has gone. Still the monopolarity is there. A lot of scholars say the monopolarity would continue, but I think it's a multi-vector world. Things are changing. U.S. wants peace in the region. U.S. wants to integrate in the region again after the withdrawal of U.S. troops or NATO troops from Afghanistan. So that's how so it would be more of a cooperation. And now Armenia is sensible enough because Armenia was backed by India in Karabakh War and other allies, which India has lost its legitimacy as well, military legitimacy and political legitimacy in the region as well. So Armenia is not backed by any of the powerful countries right now. So Armenia has to negotiate, or is sensible enough to negotiate with Azerbaijan, and I think they would come to the conclusion that they should live in peace and harmony and encourage trade and economics between the countries and the region, probably.
And Mr. Khan, as you rightly say, Azerbaijan took decisive action in terms of ultimately ending this conflict. But then we, of course, had those scenes in the White House that everybody saw, very positive scenes between the two presidents and Prime Minister Pashinyan. The Washington Joint Declaration is a document, was an agreement that I think many have heralded as being something transformative for the region. Why Just give us your sense on why that document has become so pivotal.
All right, so that document actually, what Trump's administration is trying to do right now is that's what Trump himself says, that, I'm the biggest peacemaker right now, and I want peace in all kinds of regions. Why do U.S. needs peace in all kinds of regions, and why the policy is shifted so drastically in this year, especially after Trump resumed the office? Because U.S. cannot really afford any kind of a conflicts in any kind of a regions right now, be it the Middle East or be it the South Caucasus or Central Asian countries, or even South Asia. And as I said, that U.S. has understood, the policymakers have understood that it's better to go multi-vector, to foster economic relations with the countries, and seek for their own strategic interest, than to going into conflict and spending billions and billions of dollars, and it all goes in vain, as we saw it in Afghanistan recently. So I think that their foreign policy is changing as well, and so are the other small or medium countries are also changing, and that's what Armenia is trying to do. That's what Azerbaijan is trying to do. That what Central Asian countries are trying to do. That what South Asian countries are trying to do, and European countries are even trying to do. Turkey is one of them. So what I'm trying to say is that things are changing. It's a multipolar world now. There's no such thing as hegemony of one power, and that on the other side, Russia has lost a lot of because of the sanctions and all that. Russia is not as powerful as it was before. So things are, the dynamics of the political things are really changing in this part of the world, and rest part of the world would be, yeah.
And finally, Mr. Khan, I just want to get your sense of what this mandate means for the organisation of the OSCE, particularly in the South Caucasus. Does it mean that this is now effectively a moribund organisation? Has it lost its sense of utility?
Well, it has kind of lost its legitimacy, because it was formed for security and cooperation of majorly of these two countries. Did it provide security? No. Did it provide any kind of a cooperation in these 30 years? No. Well, legitimacy is lost. But now this organization, what it needs to do is to reframe its structure, maybe reframe its policies, and trying to think that they would go by the international law in future, which they did not in this past 30 years, or and United Nations resolutions and all that. So it needs to structure itself if it needs its legitimacy back. But at this moment, it does not have any kind of legitimacy in the eyes of Azerbaijan, especially because Azerbaijan was the one which got affected the most. Azerbaijan's territory were snatched away from Azerbaijan. It was people got displaced. There was a big humanitarian crisis in Azerbaijan, and these organizations, the powers in these organizations, for example, Russia or U.S. or the other French guys, they were not even interfering in it. They were overlooking a lot of things. I mean, that's what this organization was not made for. Whatever it was made for, it did not do the thing. So it has lost its legitimacy. But in future, if they want to, do things, they have to reframe their policies.
Thank you very much. Mr. Khan, we appreciate your analysis very much, and we thank you for joining us on Prime Time.
My pleasure.
Okay, after the break, we take a look at the top business news stories shaping this week with Andy Mioch. Do stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching Prime Time now. Andy Mioch is here with the day's latest business news stories. Andy, what's on the agenda tonight?
Well, Guy, there's a lot of ground to cover at the start of the week. We'll be taking a look at Tesla's continued decline in Europe, Airbus coming back to its normal operations. There's a major data breach in Asia, and there's some news on the 6G technology as well. So let's have a look. First up, Tesla's November registrations in France and Denmark halved year over year as the company struggled to regain market share in Europe despite the launch of a new Model Y range. However, one of the countries in Europe recorded more newly registered Teslas than cars of any other brand.
Tesla's troubles in Europe dragged on through November, data has shown. Although there was one big bright spot in Norway. Monthly new car registrations are seen as an indicator for sales. Data showed monthly registrations were down 58% in France from a year ago. They were also down close to half in Denmark and 59% from a year earlier in Sweden. The electric vehicle maker has struggled to turn around market shares losses in Europe. That's despite launching a new range of its best-selling Model Y. Tesla's slowdown in Europe began late last year when CEO Elon Musk praised right-wing political figures, which set off protests across the region. Musk has gone relatively quiet on politics in recent months, but Tesla's European business hasn't recovered. Analysts further cited growing competition in the European market, especially from new Chinese entrants. They also blamed Tesla's aging lineup. There was a bright spot in Europe, though, as the EV makers sold more cars in Norway this year than any other automaker ever did in a full year. It beat the country's annual sales record with 1 month to spare, with sales up more than a third in the country.
An aviation hotfix is apparently holding. Airbus says that its fleets are returning to normal operations after implementing urgent software updates across its A320 family planes following a mid-air incident last week.
Airbus fleets were returning towards normal operations on Monday. That's after the European plane maker pushed through abrupt software changes faster than expected. Dozens of airlines from Asia to the US said they carried out a Snap software retrofit ordered by Airbus and mandated by global regulators. It's after a vulnerability to solar flares emerged in a recent mid-air incident on a JetBlue A320. Airbus said on Monday that the vast majority of around 6,000 of its A320 family fleet affected by the safety alert had been modified, with fewer than 100 jets still requiring work. Sources familiar with the matter said the unprecedented decision to recall about half of the A320 family fleet was taken shortly after the possible but unproven link to a drop in altitude on the JetBlue plane emerged late last week. Shares in Airbus were down over 3% in early trading in Paris. Following talks with regulators, Airbus issued its 8-page alert to hundreds of operators on Friday. It effectively ordered a temporary grounding by ordering the repair before next flight. A technician was flown from Rome to Istanbul to replace a component and carry out the software update on the papal plane, due to be flying the Pope to Beirut. The instruction was seen as the broadest emergency recall in the company's history. Questions now remain over a subset of generally older A320 family jets that will need a new computer rather than a mere software reset.
Now for some markets news. Japan's Nikkei share average fell at the start of the week as government bond yields rose and the yen strengthened on expectations of an interest rate hike.
Japan's Nikkei share average fell on Monday after a 4-session winning run, as government bond yields rose and the yen firmed on growing bets of a December interest rate hike. The Nikkei fell 1.8% after the stock market closed in Tokyo, starting the month on a weak note after the benchmark snapped 7 straight months of gains in November. Japanese government bond yields hit 17-year highs and the yen strengthened. As Bank of Japan Governor Kazuo Ueda's comments fueled bets that the central bank could hike interest rates as early as this month. Chip testing equipment maker Advantest slipped 4.2% to drag the Nikkei largely. Uniqlo brand owner Fast Retailing lost 2%. Meanwhile, banks rose on increasing bets of a Bank of Japan rate hike.
Over in South Korea, the country's largest online retailer, Coupang, apologized for a major data breach affecting more than 33 million customer accounts. Meanwhile, the government is looking into whether the company violated safety rules.
South Korea's biggest online retailer, Coupang, apologized on Sunday over the breach of personal information from 33.7 million customer accounts through unauthorized data access. CEO of the firm, dubbed the Amazon.com of South Korea, expressed apologies while attending a government emergency meeting to discuss the breach. The meeting was presided by Minister of Science and Information and Communications Technology. The government is looking into whether Coupang violated safety rules regarding personal information protection. The incident is the latest in a series of data leaks at major South Korean companies. Coupang said on Saturday that it learned of the data breach on November 18th and reported it to authorities. It said it was working with law enforcement and regulatory authorities. The company, whose services are ubiquitous for many Koreans using its rocket-fast deliveries, has said it had 24.7 million active commercial users in the third quarter.
European companies are exploring ways to tweak their supply chain options due to China's tightening export controls. A recent EU survey showed that more than a third of the firms have taken an issue with Beijing's slow pace of processing export licenses.
China's tightening export controls are pushing European firms to explore new supply chain capacity outside of the world's second-largest economy, a European lobbying group said on Monday, seeking cover from the US-China trade war. The European Union Chamber of Commerce in China said 1 in 3 member companies was looking to shift sourcing away from China due to Beijing's export control regime, with 40% of its flash survey's respondents reporting that the Commerce Ministry is processing export licenses more slowly than promised. Some 130 companies participated in the survey, the Chamber said, which counts German automakers BMW and Volkswagen, Finnish telecommunications maker Nokia, and French oil major Total Energies as members. Nearly 70% of respondents to the Chamber's flash survey said their overseas production facilities depended on Chinese components covered by the export control regime, while 50% of exporting firms reported that their suppliers or customers made goods that were subject to the controls or would be soon. EU firms said that the Commerce Ministry's license application process was taking longer than the promised 45 days, with respondents also taking issue with its lack of transparency and disclosure requirements. They also raised concerns about potential intellectual property theft. The survey also provided redacted examples of firms that were impacted by Beijing's export controls, including one that estimated the measures would lead to costs totaling 20% of its global revenue this year. However, 56 out of the 131 European firms that answered the survey said the export controls would have no impact, suggesting some sectors remain insulated.
And finally, in digital infrastructure news, China says it has completed the first phase of its 6G technology trials, with plans to advance to prototype development and pre-commercial testing in the coming years.
After 4 straight years of rigorous testing that yielded a portfolio of more than 300 key technologies, China has officially completed the first phase of its 6G technology trials, the Chinese Ministry of Industry and Information Technology said recently. According to officials, the country's 6G trial consists of 3 phases, with the initial one focusing on validating core technical capabilities. MIIT officials said the next stages will shift to building prototypes for targeted application scenarios and then to developing pre-commercial equipment and testing key products.
China will make continuous efforts to strengthen research on core technology and integrated technical solutions, and advance technical research and development, standard development, test verification, and application cultivation in an integrated manner, laying a solid foundation for 6G standardization and industrialization.
Experts say 6G is the world's most important digital information infrastructure for the coming decade and will integrate breakthroughs in communications, sensing, computing, and more. As part of its push to commercialize 6G by 2030, China established a group in 2019 to fast-track innovation. Since then, the group has released over 80 white papers and research reports in the field.
We entered the research and development and testing phase for equipment in 2025. This year, we have also progressed from isolated key technologies to tests for scenario-oriented, systematic technical solutions.
An industry report shows that as of June of this year, China held 40% of global 6G patents, ranking first worldwide.
Well, that is a wrap on business at the start of the week. Back to you, Guy.
And thank you very much indeed. Very interesting, that 6G, 5G, 4G. I wonder when we'll get 7G. Very busy week ahead in business. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, after the break, we'll look at the latest US-Ukraine talks as both sides enter a crucial phase of negotiations. Do stay with us. Welcome back to Prime Time. Washington and Kyiv have now moved into a critical stage of negotiations as both sides work to outline a possible path toward ending the conflict. Well, Ukraine's chief negotiator has met US representatives in Florida, including Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. Now, the talks have brought a degree of cautious optimism, with US Secretary of State Marco Rubio describing them as productive while stressing that further progress is still required. Here's more.
We had another very productive.
A high-level meeting between US and Ukrainian officials in Florida on Sunday was very productive, according to US Secretary of State Marco Rubio. He says while progress is evident, significant work remains to end Russia's war in Ukraine.
As I told you earlier this morning, our goal here is to end the war, but it's more than just to end the war. We don't just want to end the war, we also want to help Ukraine be safe forever, so never again will they face another invasion, and equally importantly, we want them to enter an age of true prosperity.
Speaking just hours later, President Donald Trump said that broader peace discussions with Russia are going along well.
Well, we want to stop people from being killed. Doesn't have much to do with us, but I'd like to see if we can save a lot of souls. A lot of people are being killed. Last month, we had 27,000 people killed in that ridiculous war that should have never happened. It would have never happened if I were president.
The Florida talks came after nearly 2 weeks of negotiations based on a US peace plan, as both sides work to outline a path that keeps Ukraine fully sovereign and independent. US Special Envoy Steve Witkoff is expected to meet with Russian representatives later this week as part of the ongoing diplomatic push. Sunday's session marked a shift on the Ukrainian side, with National Security Council Secretary Rustem Umerov taking over as chief negotiator. He stepped in after the resignation of Andriy Yermak, who left his post amid a corruption scandal in Kyiv.
Thankful to President Trump's super team that is supporting us. We are discussing about the future of Ukraine, about the security of Ukraine, about no repetition of aggression of Ukraine, about prosperity of Ukraine, about how to rebuild Ukraine. And we're thankful for the efforts of United States and its team to helping us. US is hearing us, US is supporting us, US is walking beside us.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said he expected the talks to build on earlier meetings in Geneva, where Ukraine had already offered its counter-proposal to the US plan. The negotiations are taking place as Kyiv faces growing pressure from advancing Russian forces and a political crisis at home triggered by a major corruption probe in the energy sector.
Well, joining me now to discuss this in detail is Antonio Leite, Chair Professor at Nova SBE in Lisbon, Portugal. Professor, thank you very much indeed for joining us on Prime Time. How credible then are Washington's promises of long-term security for Ukraine when US officials themselves admit the talks are only, in quotes, productive, but far from complete?
Hello, good afternoon. Thanks for having me. I think at this point there may be some discussions, or there are certainly discussions between the Ukrainians and the Americans regarding, among other things, the security guarantees. But my view is that at this point they may have been talking about something specific, but there is really no agreement on that because there's no announcement whatsoever regarding those guarantees. They have been talked about in the past. There is some American unwillingness to commit troops to the ground. So we don't know exactly what sort of guarantees they may be talking about in terms of a ceasefire zone or other type of guarantees, a no-fly zone, whatever. So at this point, I think it's an issue that has been addressed, but even though progress may have happened, it's certainly there is no consensus, there is no final agreement regarding that. And on the other hand, this is not just a matter between the U.S. and Ukraine. The U.S. is also negotiating on a parallel track with the Russians, and what they agree with the Ukrainians that also is also to be agreed upon by the Russians. So I think we are still in a non-final part of these negotiations, which are of course very delicate, very complicated, maybe progressing, but not to a point where announcements like those can be made surely.
And Professor, Ukraine says it's shaping future terms, lots of sincere goodwill, good spirit towards Ukraine. But in terms of hard leverage, negotiating power, as Mr. Trump would say,
yes,
holding of the cards,
yes,
how much leverage does Kyiv actually hold at this point?
Well, I'm the guest speaking.
Professor, we may be having a few technical difficulties there. Can you still hear me? Can I just check you can still hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
Fantastic. I just wanted to find out, we've seen lots of goodwill towards Ukraine. Ukraine themselves say that they are actively shaping future terms. Mr. Trump likes to talk about holding the cards, famously. How much hard leverage, real negotiating power at this point does Kyiv actually have?
Well, Kyiv right now has basically two big cards. Well, they value what we'll see how worth they are, as how worthy they are as we move forward. But one of them is the willingness to keep fighting. So there's no way to have peace if the aggressed part does not surrender and keeps fighting, and so that's one card they have. And the other one is, even though at a secondary position right now, they still have the support of the vast majority of the European countries, especially the most important ones. And even though the US does not treat Europe as an equal partner, as oftentimes in the past, over the last 80 years, the fact is that, the Ukraine situation is a matter of foremost importance for Europeans, not just in the EU, but also for the British. And they have been made that clear, even though, they are not driving the process at this point. So I think these are the two cards, and without an agreement on the Ukrainian part, which I like to reiterate is the aggressed one, there cannot be an agreement, even if the US and Russia want so. So there needs to be a three-party agreement. The US needs to come to terms with, the Ukrainian red lines. Same thing with Mr. Putin. So it's still a very complicated negotiation moving forward. And I think that even though everybody wants to be optimistic, I still see a lot of complicated issues to be solved before we can think of at least a ceasefire.
And Professor, Donald Trump has said that this war doesn't have much to do with the United States. In fact, he said that similar points in different words many times before. But how does that contrast with America being involved at almost every stage? What's the reality here? Because President Trump does seem to be pretty invested in this.
Well, I think he is. On the one hand, because, he could just withdraw, but he also knows, and even the most recent polls confirm that even in his own constituency, the majority of the people are not totally neutral in the sense that they support Ukraine versus Russia in the U.S. Not just the Americans in general, but even the Republicans in particular. So he has to deal with the people that elected him, even though he has a very substantial grip over the MAGA crowd. The fact is that he's certainly taking that into consideration. On the other hand, I think there is also the business part of the problem that he is envisaging. On the one hand, he wants to have mutually beneficial relations with the Russians. On the other hand, he cannot totally disregard and discard the Europeans at this stage. And he also knows that some of the things that he may get from the Ukrainians implies some stability in the region. So for both domestic political reasons and for economic reasons, even if he doesn't see the U.S. playing the role the U.S. has played in the past, he may say that he's not involved, but he has something at stake here. And the fact is, his revealed preference has been one of involvement, even though his speech has been one of trying to stay away as far as possible, but he's the one that is writing the show at this point. So, yes, he has several reasons to be involved, and he clearly is involved. One thing is what's happening, the other thing is the rhetoric, and the rhetoric at this point does not really combine well with what we are seeing.
And if you look at the three actors of the US, Ukraine itself, and the EU, at various points since this conflict began, those three actors have not always been aligned. I mean, that's possibly a great understatement. Do you get the sense that at this point now, though, there is broadly as good an alignment as there has been for a long time, and that might present an opportunity?
Well, I think Europe has understood that they cannot play an equal role as the U.S. because they lack the means, even though they have been financing a lot of the war and they are very involved, and the war has a lot more to do with Europeans, especially on the eastern flank of the EU and NATO, than to the U.S. that is an ocean apart. The fact is that the reality of the lack of military power in Europe has led to this position. So I think that at least what it seems is that even though the Europeans are trying to make sure that some of the Ukrainian red lines are being taken into account, and the moving from the original plan to the one we knew in Geneva and is continuing now in Florida, shows that there is some European leverage playing into the game, which will probably, if there is an agreement, is going to be much more in line with a US design than what a sole European design would be. But the fact is that I think Europeans have realized that either they stick with US and they try to influence and get something that is acceptable to all parties, or they're going to be left alone with Ukraine against Russia and its allies. So I think that the Europeans are compromising, and so far they have been able to guide the US or to influence the US to a point where it's still bearable from an European perspective, the type of agreement they're going to reach with the Ukrainians and the Russians, if at the end all the three parties agree with it.
Professor Late, we appreciate your analysis very much indeed. Thank you for joining us from Lisbon. Okay, Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan paid a one-day official visit to Tehran on Sunday, discussing expansion of bilateral ties and exchanging views on major regional and international developments with his Iranian counterpart and other senior officials. A News's Toraj Shirililo has more now.
Turkey's top diplomat Hakan Fidan visited Tehran on Sunday in an intensive official trip during which he met with Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi and top-ranking Iranian officials, including President Masoud Pezeshkian, Parliament Speaker Mohammad Baqir Ghalibaf, and Secretary of Supreme National Security Council Ali Larijani. According to a Foreign Ministry statement issued at the end of the visit, the two sides discussed and exchanged views on bilateral relations and regional and international developments. It said Iran and Turkey stressed the joint determination of the leaders of the two countries to strengthen and develop relations and cooperation in all areas of interest, including the economy, trade, tourism, transit, energy, technology, health, culture, security, and combating terrorism and organized crime. They also exchanged views on strengthening cooperation and coordination between Tehran and Ankara at the level of international organizations and multilateral and regional arrangements, the Iranian nuclear issue and the Russia-Ukraine war. Iranian Foreign Minister Araghchi said at a joint press conference following the meeting that Iran and Turkey emphasized the need to remove obstacles on the way of trade between the two neighboring countries. They announced that Iranian Consulate General will open in the Turkish city of Van in the near future, which will bring new potentials to the bilateral ties. Also, Turkish Foreign Minister Fidan told reporters that cooperation in the field of energy was one of the items on the agenda of his meeting with Araghchi. He added that Ankara believes in resolving the nuclear dispute between Tehran and Western countries through diplomacy and dialogue. Toraj Shirililo, Tehran, A News.
Well, joining me now to discuss this further is Dr. Melih Demirtas, an independent researcher and political analyst and former diplomat, joining us from Ankara in Turkey. Thank you very much indeed, sir, for joining us on Prime Time. I want to talk to you firstly about Turkey's broader strategy across the region, particularly for how the country manages its influence in relation to Iran. Just give us a sense of how this visit reflects that strategy.
Thank you, Mr. Sean, first of all, for having me in this important topic. And yes, it's a very concise visit, but it is full of agenda, full of topics. I'm included as also your correspondent from Tehran rightly expressed. There are many issues on the agenda. We can say from politics, high politics, of course, in international scholars always military and security structures, till, of course, economy, cultural, even some new consulate generals in Turkish territory. Everything sticks in just 24 hours, we can say. But yes, for Turkey, it is this balancing act. I mean, first of all, this diplomacy act. It is first priority always. If you look at our geography, we can say that in these last 2-3 years, of course, maybe 10 years, always full of clashes, full of some new conflicts, and Turkish diplomacy always trying to adapt itself. Iran has a special place, not only for this new Republic of Turkey, for the new Turkish foreign policy, but from maybe till the middle, times of the Ottoman era. We can always say that this is maybe unchanged border, more than 400 years. I mean, we have, of course, as you may know from geography, maybe maps, there are more than 500 meters. We have a border, important border between Turkey and Iran, and we have always saying this 400 years doesn't make any change. I mean, although there are so many clashes, although there are so many crises in our geography. So first of all, we can say, yes, all foreign ministers, but also I think in a very short term, our President Erdogan also will visit Iran for strategic high-level talks. And we can say that this balance is important. First of all, due to these actions of some which are so devastating, which are so destructive, especially in these last 2 years, but also to maybe enrich the relations, because these two countries, both Turkey and Iran, are strong countries, very historical countries, and they have also some voices on many issues.
Yeah, it's very interesting, the picture you paint, you know, the unchanged border, the pragmatism that we're seeing, that Turkey is famous for, that diplomatic dexterity, so to speak. And this sense of kind of shared heritage and rich relationship too. With all that in mind, what are the current priorities, do you think, for both Ankara and Tehran when it comes to things like trade, security, counter-terrorism? What's top of the list for the two sides to work on together?
Actually, as you said, these topics are maybe somehow interrelated. First of all, we have important maybe environment, stable environment, first of all, for having also stable economy. Because as you know, we are also open to some influences from some countries, both Turkey and Iran, although they have an important heritage also, as I said, from history, from their communities. We have also some fragile economies sometimes. These economic structures, these open structures to some foreign influences. We are always thinking that what can we in our geography, first of all, because outsiders, we always calling, even they are coming from west, even they are coming from east, even north and south, they're always having some voices on our agendas. I mean, for our economy, for our politics. But if you look at last 500 or 600 years, we always said that both Turkey and Iran, in even their empire times, even their changing regimes, they have always some important priorities. It starts, first of all, of course, with economy, because how we can derive money, how we can have much more revenue for our growing, especially communities, comes to this the mind of course, first diplomats, but also our tradesmen. So energy issue is maybe because of this on the maybe first or second place on the list. But first of all, the security. Because due to the attacks of Israel, we must call maybe this state as also the #1 topic in the agenda of these two foreign ministers yesterday. Israel's actions once again showed that we must be ready. I think we must be ready for changing circumstances. We must be ready also for devastating actions of some countries. I call Israel, but of course, some Russian actions, some Ukrainian actions also we have seen in the Black Sea, as you may remember from last night. Also, United States is always on the agenda. We can say that we are always open to such influences, even they are coming from military, even they are coming from economic sectors. So yes, the counterterrorism due to the attacks of separatist groups for years in our territories, and then economy, and then maybe to be more prepared to do these foreign interferences is maybe this top maybe 3 of our agenda right now.
And you mentioned that energy is on that list there of priorities. I know that potential energy partnerships is an element that has featured in the talks. I think our viewers would be very interested in this area. What do you think is possible in the short and medium term when it comes to energy partnerships?
As I said, for a growing economy, the energy is always, especially in this post-Cold War, maybe always on the agenda of diplomats, on tradesmen, and many strategists. For some countries, it is not maybe the #1 issue because of this geography richness, due to their maybe rich fuel sources. Iran can be counted list. I mean, due to this very enriched, of course, sources in its territory. First of all, for natural gas, we have also a very strength relation for years. This natural gas trade between Turkey and Iran, maybe it could be renewed in this coming months. As far as I know, last year our agreement will end, but in talks between these two foreign ministers, maybe concluded. But I think our with presidential visit, it will be maybe concluded for the next months. But after, of course, natural gas, these transit corridors. Of course, our brother country, Azerbaijan, had important victorious terms. And after that, we have seen that such with the former Zengazur and now Trip Corridor, we can say that such trade relations is also stimulating community ideology and diplomacy ideology. So we need such ideology or such maybe cement, such motivation factor with Iran always, because Iran is also, as I said, open to such foreign influences and very negative maybe atmosphere due to this Western ideology upon it. And Iran cannot maybe have a free voice. Also, its community cannot free voice to transform itself to a more maybe democratic, maybe a richful country. In this coming decades, we really aim to build this relation, first of all, with this new energy corridors. Maybe it could be with some transport ideal, but first of all, this natural gas and new renewed treaty between these two countries will be on the agenda after foreign ministers, now in the presidential maybe level.
Now, we've spoken about Turkey's diplomatic skills. And to what extent do you think those skills are going to be tested when it comes to the established and developing relationship between Ankara and Washington, US sanctions on Iran, and now this growing collaboration and spirit of teamwork and partnership that's developing between Tehran and Ankara?
Sanctions and states, sanctions and maybe innocent communities, we can call them. I mean, yes, two governments can be hostile between each other, as we've seen between United States and Iran for years, for decades. But after a while, we also see this can be not maybe a real solution to have a community which can be really enriched and which can be really democratic in years. I mean, United States, some diplomats, I mean, some also statesmen declaring this. I mean, towards Iran, they're also having some maybe changing politics. Even Mr. Trump, when he's coming to this second term, sometimes giving signals that he could be somehow one day in Tehran or some other places to have such talks with maybe Iranian counterparts. But Turkey has done this for many years, for many decades, because it could maybe a real bridge between this sanction, supporters from the Western world, but it also knows that we are a really sui generis position in this partnership. I mean, in this partnership of Western alliance. Of course, we really attribute the utmost importance, the real importance to this NATO pact, to Western ideal, to democratic ideals, but it doesn't mean that we have another side maybe of the medallion. It could be Russia one day, it could be Iran another day, maybe China very near soon. We have all seen that this state can affect every agenda for politics now, or even Azerbaijan or Turkey. So we see that, yes, Western sanctions or Western, maybe United States, first of all, because European counterparts always giving some moderate signals when we are talking to Iranian counterparts. Think about these last decades that they're always pushing more positive dialogue to some Iranian politics. Even this Israeli devastating action in territory, we have seen a very important division between these European diplomats. But for the United States, I think that we must have a much more moderate line. And I think Mr. Erdogan always talking this with Mr. Trump. And very soon, I hope that thanks to this also new government, maybe Mr. Pezeshkian's government in Iran, we can be much more open dialogue, also with our Western friends, Western counterparts. But first of all, of course, we must talk about much more about these Israeli actions, about this Israeli government and what they did, especially in these last 2 years, destructively in the region.
Dr. Demirtas, we thank you very much indeed for analysis. Thank you very much for joining us on Prime Time. Okay, after the break, Anya Zabaleva will be showing us the trending social media posts of the day. Do stay with us. Welcome back to Prime Time. Anya Zabaleva is here to dive into the world now of social media. Anya, what is on the agenda tonight?
Hello. We have natural disasters, we have Airbus issues, we have a rare painting discovered in Paris, and all of that has been discussed across the web throughout the weekend and today, so we'll take a look at the highlights. Southeast Asia is still dealing with torrential rainfall and flooding. This time Sri Lanka was hit especially hard by Cyclone Ditwa. More than 40,000 people have been displaced while search and rescue operations are still ongoing.
Cyclone Ditwa has swept across Sri Lanka, killing at least 123 people. Heavy rains triggered deadly landslides, burying homes and destroying vehicles. Floodwaters have submerged hospitals, streets, and entire neighborhoods, forcing nearly 44,000 people into shelters. Rescue teams, including the Sri Lanka Air Force, are helping stranded residents, while authorities warn that widespread flooding could continue in Colombo and other areas.
Moving on, the Australian capital faced a massive blaze this weekend. Flames ripped through a St. Mary's waste facility, sending thick smoke across West Sydney after an explosion. This is how 200 firefighters dealt with the inferno. Let's take a look. Next up, travelers in US, Japan, Australia and New Zealand faced some major inconvenience in the recent days when a critical software vulnerability on Airbus jets led to the recall of thousands of aircraft. Let's see how Airbus handled the issue.
Europe's Airbus has ordered an immediate software overhaul on a massive portion of its top-selling A320 family jets, a move affecting roughly 6,000 aircraft, more than half the world's fleet. The company said a recent incident exposed a critical flaw. Intense solar radiation can corrupt key data used by the aircraft's flight control systems. Airbus admitted the emergency action will cause major disruption for airlines and passengers. The EU Aviation Safety Agency is preparing an emergency airworthiness directive, forcing carriers to ground aircraft for rapid software rollbacks. About 2/3 of the jets will be down only briefly, but hundreds more may need hardware replacements, potentially leaving them parked for weeks. In Australia, Jetstar Airways, the budget airline operated by Australia's national carrier Qantas, says it has been swept up in the recall affecting more than half of Airbus's global A320 fleet. Chief pilot Tyrone Symes reported that 90 flights have been disrupted, with 34 Jetstar aircraft requiring the mandatory software fix.
Flights, we've got about 90 flights affected, and of course that's just Jetstar, but it's important to note that it is a worldwide issue, of course, so there's many thousands of customers right across the world with different airlines affected.
The update involves reverting to an earlier software version and must be completed before the planes can take to the skies again.
So we would expect to see further disruption today, but then maybe a little bit of minor disruption tomorrow. But we're trying to rectify the situation as quickly as we possibly can, as all airlines are across the globe.
Japan's largest airline, ANA Holdings, cancelled 65 flights on Saturday after the Airbus A320 recall forced it to ground part of its fleet. ANA and its affiliates, including Peach Aviation, are Japan's main operators of Airbus single-aisle jets. Its rival, Japan Airlines, flies mostly Boeing aircraft and is unaffected. The Airbus recall was triggered by a JetBlue flight on the 30th of October that made an emergency landing after a sudden drop in altitude injured several passengers.
The glitch in Airbus systems also affected the plans of the Pope, who's currently on his first ever Middle East tour. Through, thankfully, a brief stop in Turkey for some jet maintenance, Pope Leo safely arrived in Beirut, Lebanon. Let's see.
Pope Leo XIV urged political leaders in Lebanon to make peace their highest priority in a country that remains a target of Israeli airstrikes. The pontiff made the comment on his second leg of his first overseas trip as Catholic leader. He met with Lebanese officials on Sunday, including the Parliament Speaker, Prime Minister and President. Addressing a chamber packed with politicians and religious leaders, Pope Leo praised the resilience of the Lebanese people.
Everywhere in the world around us, certainly there are millions of Lebanese here and throughout the world who serve peace silently day after day. Yet you who have important institutional tasks within this nation are destined for a special beatitude if you can say that you have put the goal of peace above all else. You are a people who do not give up, but in the face of trials, you always know how to rise again with courage.
His visit comes a week after Israeli airstrikes hit the Lebanese capital. Standing beside the Pope, Lebanon President Joseph Aoun delivered a defiant message. His remarks underscored the sense of siege many Lebanese feel amid ongoing instability.
Your Holiness, tell the world on our behalf that we will not die, we will not depart, we will not despair, and we will not surrender. We will remain here, breathing freedom, creating joy, mastering love, embracing innovation, chanting for modernity, and forging each day a fuller life.
Meanwhile, Lebanese citizens and visitors lined the streets to catch a glimpse of Pope Leo as his motorcade passed through Beirut. Lebanon is home to the largest Christian community in the Middle East and has been deeply shaken by the recent escalation between Israel and Hezbollah, fueling fears of a wider confrontation.
Speaking of flying in Turkey, the new Turkish unmanned fighter jet Bayraktar Kızıl Elma successfully completed a test flight, showing its ability to detect and engage target. Let's take a closer look. Now we move on to the art world, where a true miracle occurred. A painting by a 17th century Flemish artist titled Christ on Cross has surfaced in a Paris home after being lost for centuries. What's surprising is the work is still in exceptional condition. Let's find out how that happened.
A painting by the 17th century Flemish master Peter Paul Rubens, thought lost since 1613, has resurfaced in Paris. Titled Christ on Cross, it shows Jesus nailed to the cross with Calvary and Jerusalem in the background. The artwork reflects the Counter-Reformation and Rubens's personal Catholic faith after leaving Protestantism. It had quietly remained with the family of painter William Bouguereau in his Maison Atelier in Paris until auctioneer Jean-Pierre Ozanat spotted it during a sale of artworks from the property.
Rubens' Christ paintings are major works among his pieces. It's one of the most important pieces ever, and this is coming to us in an exceptional state. No restoration, no repainting. It's entirely a handmade Christ of Rubens, and so this is something exceptional. This doesn't happen anymore. We no longer see Rubens' paintings come to us like this.
Ozanat said the painting had been verified with the Centrum Rubenianum in Antwerp, confirming its authenticity. It will now go on auction in France and is expected to fetch up to €2 million, making it one of the rarest Rubens pieces to appear on the market in decades.
Last but not least, today, two of the most unstoppable athletes of the past year were named in Monaco. Sweden's Mondo Duplantis and America's Sydney McLaughlin-Levrone have dominated the season, setting new world records and making history. Here's a look at their incredible, historic achievements.
World Athlete of the Year, Mondo Duplantis.
Budapest. What an honour and a privilege for all of us to be here. The crowd are on their feet. They're roaring him on. Is it his 4th world record of the year?
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much. You're probably tired of seeing me, right? Just so proud to represent myself, my family, my future wife, and everybody that supports me so much. The field eventers also as well. I think that's very important. Yeah.
The World Female Athlete of the Year, Sydney McLaughlin-Levrone.
Wow, thank you guys so much for this award. I'm truly honored and humbled to be receiving this in a category full of so many amazing women who had outstanding years and performances. I'm honestly shocked to be receiving this, but I'm so grateful to World Athletics. I'm grateful to the fans who voted for me.
And that's all I got for you today. Don't forget to check us out on your favorite social media platform. It's A News TV, and anews.tv is our website where you can read up on all of the latest news from all over the world. That's anews.tv, and thank you for your attention. Back to you, Guy.
Aina, thank you very much. Fascinating selection there. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, that does bring us to the end of Prime Time for tonight. Please do join us again tomorrow evening for more insight, analysis and perspective. And from all of us here at A News, thanks for watching.